Oh, unbelievable, weren't they? Let's have a quick look at that weather forecast. It's going to be a fairly bright day today. Again, a very windy one. 8 degrees, 46 Fahrenheit, the temperature high. Again, tomorrow, extremely strong winds. Now, an extra programme which isn't billed. It's cartoon time. And that was an extra double bill of cartoons. Well, a very good morning to you. This is HTV's Nightclub. Time now to cross to the studios of ITN for the morning news. The time is exactly 5 o'clock.
President Bush faces strong peace lobby on Capitol Hill. Good morning. It's 5 o'clock on Thursday, the 3rd of January. This is ITN's Morning News, the headlines. President Bush will today hear strong demands for more diplomatic efforts to avert war in the Gulf when he meets congressional leaders. Here, John Major will hear similar demands from King Hussein of Jordan when they meet for talks over lunch. And the boxing promoter Frank Warren threatens to hit back at the authorities that have banned him. Also in this programme, why Yosemite National Park could soon be owned by the Japanese, a report in our world news. And from American television, US airlines fight it out on the ground for control of the air. But first, the main news. Congressional Democrats have overwhelmingly urged President Bush to give economic sanctions time to work in persuading Iraq to pull out of Kuwait. They meet with the president early this morning at the White House. This report from Bob Franken.
As the showdown with Saddam Hussein approaches, many voters have made sure their senators and representatives know exactly where they stand.
There's a group of people who want to go to war, do it quickly, massively, overwhelmingly, a matter of days, and get out. There's another group of people who strongly oppose the thought of war.
Congressman Hamilton is part of the leadership group that is about to hold another meeting with President Bush. Many in Congress believe these White House gatherings are inadequate. 3 Democrats are introducing a non-binding resolution. It reads, in part, any offensive action taken against Iraq must be explicitly approved by the Congress before such action may be initiated.
Congress and Congress alone can declare war.
That has been argued for 2 centuries, but the Constitution does provide Congress with another power, control over the appropriation of money to raise and support armies, which means, contends one leading Democrat, that if the president ignores Congress, he's taking a big risk.
If he chooses to do that, and I earnestly hope that he does not, then I think the Congress has to reach for the only tool left to it, which is to cut off the funding for the war, for the effort.
But the Democrats who are in control of Congress are split over formal debate.
And that would send the wrong signal to Saddam Hussein.
The cost of all this will be the subject of Budget Committee hearings that begin Friday. And there will be legislation aimed at squeezing more money and military troops from U.S. allies. Many in Congress will continue to argue that the economic sanctions against Iraq need more time to work. Democratic Senator-elect Paul Wellstone and his wife held an emotional news conference at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial.
It's getting very late. But it can't be too late. There's always a time to die. What's the hurry?
Administration critics say the point of congressional debate will be to avoid another Vietnam in the Persian Gulf.
Here, the Ministry of Defence has now asked naval reservists to volunteer for active duty because of the Gulf crisis. It's written to 2,500, but actually needs some 500. King Hussein of Jordan arrived in London yesterday. He has talks over lunch with Prime Minister John Major at Downing Street.
The Royal Navy have had to fill an extra 1,400 jobs in order to bring ships' crews in the Gulf to a war footing. Most of the reservists contacted will be asked to serve in Britain, releasing more regulars for duty at sea and in the Navy's command centres. From Iraq, these television pictures claim to show a newly developed airborne radar. As experts in London questioned its capabilities, the Foreign Office were issuing warnings to British families living in 2 more Gulf states. They've advised around 600 Britons living in Jordan and Yemen that women and children should leave the area well ahead of the January the 15th deadline. That advice follows warnings covering 5 other Gulf states. But the Foreign Office have stressed this should not be taken as a sign that war is either likely or imminent. And at Heathrow, the start of another peace initiative. King Hussein of Jordan beginning a 4-nation tour, during which he hopes to persuade the European community to open direct talks with Baghdad. German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher said he hoped the EC would agree to independent contacts with the Iraqi leadership. The British government still believes direct contact with Iraq, even on European soil, may be the EC message that Iraq must withdraw from Kuwait by the UN deadline.
The last hostage to be freed from Iraq has arrived home in Northern Ireland. Brian Duffy was jailed last month for illegally trying to flee the country. He was freed as a New Year gesture. Although he was greeted with champagne, Mr. Duffy said he really wanted a glass of Guinness. Scientists have been discussing the environmental damage a war in the Gulf might do. At a conference in London, experts said that if the Kuwaiti oil field was set alight, it could burn for a decade and cause the failure of the Asian monsoon rains.
Because of this tremendous amount of burning that takes place, there'll be a lot of consumption of oxygen. And when there's a lot of consumption of oxygen, you start getting soot and smoke. This could then develop into a small little mini nuclear winter, whereby then, below the smoke, you get a tremendous lowering of temperature.
The promoter Frank Warren has had his licence to manage boxers and stage bouts suspended in a dispute over money. He has threatened to sue the Boxing Board of Control for loss of earnings.
It was this world title fight in Australia in 1989 which sparked today's move. The Yorkshire boxer Tom Collins claims Warren owes him $20,000 because Warren's company bought the television rights. But the fight was stopped after just 2 rounds, and Warren says that meant his pictures were worthless since he couldn't sell them.
The agreement with the boxer was, should the fight be televised, then he would get paid. The fight was never televised. And the facts of the matter are the board do not have a jurisdiction over this matter because I personally did not contract with the fighter.
The Boxing Board of Control say they're taking Warren's licence away because he didn't meet their deadline for paying the money to Collins. Without a licence, Warren won't be able to run boxing shows or allow the boxers he manages to fight. It's the latest blow for Warren, who a year ago survived an attempt to kill him. One of his former boxers, Terry Marsh, was recently cleared of the shooting after an Old Bailey trial. Warren now returns to the court, and he said if it isn't settled soon, he'll sue the board for loss of earnings.
There we take a break. Coming next, our regular look at the world news. Join us again in a couple of minutes.
This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war. This happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in a silver sea, which serves it in the office of a wall, or as a moat defensive to a house against the envy of less happier lands. This blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England.
When you're driving round a roundabout, always let the other fella know where you're going. Signal your intentions clearly, or all sorts of misunderstandings can arise. If you're going to turn right, don't stay in the left-hand lane all the way round and keep everybody guessing. Let's start again, shall we? Give way to traffic coming from the right. If you're turning left, indicate left as you approach in the left-hand lane. If you're going straight on, enter in the left-hand lane, but don't indicate left until you pass the first exit. If you're turning right, indicate right as you approach in the right-hand lane, keep to that lane as you go round, and keep indicating right until you pass the exit before the one you intend to leave by, then indicate left. Then we'll all get home a lot earlier. Always let the other fella know where you're going. It's the only fair thing to do.
Welcome back. It's 9 minutes past 5. Now the world news with Alistair Burnett, which was broadcast by satellite to viewers around the globe last night.
Hello, I'm Alistair Burnett with the ITN World News. We'll bring you the top international stories and the business report. The headlines. President Bush faces growing pressure to negotiate with Iraq. In the Gulf, the multinational force faces bad weather. And the Iraqi clock that may never tell the time. First, America's President George Bush is facing growing pressure to find a last-minute solution to the Gulf crisis. He's sending his Secretary of State, James Baker, to the Middle East, although there are no plans for him to go to Iraq. In Europe, efforts towards a peace initiative continue. Jordan's King Hussein has been in London for talks with the British Prime Minister, John Major. ITN's Alistair Stewart assessed the diplomatic developments on Wednesday.
Secretary of State Baker swept into the White House at dawn for yet another top-level meeting with the President. Also there, Vice President Quayle, just back from the Gulf, and talks with the leaders of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Baker's mission is to consult with those very leaders and other allies in the Gulf on how the UN resolutions will be implemented should Iraq not have left Kuwait by January the 15th. Even last night, Iraq's top diplomat here was still trying to keep the door open to talks.
We always wanted to have a dialogue. We always wanted to talk. We always wanted to arrive at peace through negotiation.
But White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater said this morning Iraq shows no interest in a diplomatic solution. But if Washington judges Iraq to have had a serious change of heart, Baker will shortly be in the right place to meet Saddam Hussein or Tariq Aziz. If not, Baker will be telling the allies in the Gulf how and when America intends to force Iraq out of Kuwait. Alistair Stewart, ITN, Washington.
The troops in the Gulf's multinational force have spent the past 3 months acclimatizing to the desert heat in Saudi Arabia. But winter has now arrived, bringing its own particular problems. Apart from the cold, a serious concern is sand. Wind-driven sand is hampering training exercises and affecting weaponry.
A tank disappears into a cloud of sand, an increasingly common sight as winds blow across this barren landscape.
We'll be looking mostly at winds from the north through the next couple of months.
As the mission changes from defense to offense, one other thing is changing as well. That's the weather. Winter has come to Saudi Arabia.
As the wind rises, the temperature falls, and those who feel it most are the soldiers nearest the front.
Yeah, about 30 degrees. It's real cold.
Very, very cold, in my opinion. I'm from Wisconsin. I think it's cold.
The cold is worst in the early morning hours, when soldiers have to rise before the sun.
I can't feel my toes right now.
Most GIs don't have the luxury of heated tents, but some have found other ways to make it through the night.
You guys look like you figured out a way to stay warm.
You got it right. It took us a while, but we got it.
What'd you do?
Dug. Just started digging.
You know, you can't feel it in here. It just blows on over the top.
The weather, of course, affects both sides.
I doubt that there are very many guys on the bad guys' side that came from Minnesota, so we've got a couple of trained ringers in our midst that are willing to deal with the cold here.
The cold can cause discomfort, but it is not likely to affect operations. The wind, however, can wreak havoc with battle plans. At the least, it blows sand into everything. At worst, it can impair the performance of weapons.
Jammed again.
You don't have to really be an artilleryman to figure out that if the sandstorm's got visibility reduced down to a half mile, then you're only going to be able to get to engage targets as far as you can see.
So far, the only noticeable impact of the sandstorms has been the cancellation of helicopter operations. But that's so far. The weather is expected to grow windier and colder over the next month. Then, in February, the rains begin.
Work is continuing on a major new construction in Iraq, despite a strong chance it would be destroyed by conventional or nuclear bombs in a Gulf war. A multi-million-pound clock tower is being built in the center of Baghdad. But if a diplomatic solution isn't found, it's unlikely the clock will ever work. Already its timing mechanism hasn't been delivered because of the trade embargo.
Iraq is building a monument to optimism. Workers are busy on the $40 million Baghdad clock tower, even though this could be ground zero in 2 weeks' time. It would be sad if this was destroyed, says Mohammed Shatta. Only God knows what will happen. The women of Baghdad asked God for peace today, and now there is new reason for hope in a fresh diplomatic initiative from the European community.